Well, Bill 85 is fundamentally and fatally flawed. The bill sweeps in 12 different pieces of labor legislation that took decades and generations to build. It takes away rights that have been enshrined both here in the province and elsewhere across the country, and just throws them on the heap. The process was rushed, it was too ambitious, there has not been adequate consultation or dialogue, there isn't support even in the Minister's own advisory committee for the government to move forward on this legislation. And so what we're doing is telling the government to delay implementation of this bill, delay the passing of it, send it back to your advisory committee for proper dialogue and consultation. And there are hundreds of changes to this legislation. Just a couple of examples. The change from an 8-hour day to a 10-hour day. What that is that's a 10% rollback on minimum wage. Because if you're a minimum wage earner today and you work a 10-hour shift, you get a check for $110 for that day's work. After Bill 85 passes, that same 10-hour day will get you a check of $100. So it's a $10 pay cut for someone working minimum wage who currently works a 10-hour day. The other one is that they've eliminated the weekend in the changes to the Labor Standards Act. Currently, if you're in a workplace that has 10 or more people, the legislation provides that the employer must give you 2 consecutive days of rest, one of which must be a Sunday, wherever possible. The new legislation removes the requirement for the employer to do that and takes away the provision that allowed that to occur on agreement between a majority of the employees in the workplace. So it just gives the employer the ability to do whatever they want with your hours of work, and you have no say. Those are the kinds of regressive changes that are being contemplated in this new legislation on the labor standards side. There are hundreds of changes to the Trade Union Act, there are hundreds of changes to occupational health and safety, there are hundreds of changes to other legislation, and it moves us back many, many decades. It's very, very poorly drafted, poorly conceived, and rushed through the process too quickly. Government needs to take a step back and do it in a way that is acceptable and is recognized as an appropriate consultation in our country. Well, I'm not sure why the government seems bound and determined to attack working men and women and their rights. Our economy is going along fine. There's no companies that have not set up in the province of Saskatchewan because of the existing labor laws. And we got to this boom economy under the laws that we've been operating under for the last 7 decades or so. So there's no urgency, and we don't know who's asking for these changes. It's purely ideological, and it is an attempt, I think, to just give employers a free hand to do whatever they want with workers, and nobody really cares about what that impact that has on their family, at least no one in the current government. Tell the government to slow down on their implementation of Bill 85, to engage in a respectful dialogue with the Minister's Advisory Committee, who has been appointed by the Minister, and to start taking the advice of the people that have been appointed to this expert panel. If they weren't intending to take the advice of the people that they've appointed to the expert panel, why did they appoint the expert panel in the first place?
Going to repeal and replace every significant piece of legislation that touches on the employment relationship in Saskatchewan. So that's the Trade Union Act, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Labor Standards Act, to name a few. And it consolidates them all into one statute that will replace everything, but a lot of the major protections are not going to be continued. Some of the more dramatic examples are in the field of the labor standards. We're seeing the removal of some fairly significant protections around hours of work, around weekends, around rest breaks. Just to take an example, weekends. The current act says that employees are entitled to a 2-day weekend and that one of them should be a Sunday wherever possible. But the new act says that employees will only be entitled to a 1-day weekend. It says nothing about Sundays. And it says that prescribed employees will have access to a 2-day weekend, but we don't have draft regulations, so we don't know what that means. When they use the word prescribed, it means that it's going to be supplied by regulations later. So right now, it looks like a lot of employees are not going to be entitled to weekends, which is sad because I don't know about your family, but for me, that's the only time that we have to we can get together because everybody has a job. Final offer votes are one of the worst drafted sections of Bill 85. Basically, the new legislation will allow either the employer or a group of 100 employees or 45% of the bargaining unit to trigger a final offer vote simply by asking the board to order one. The board does not have discretion to decline to order the vote. And it says any time after notice to bargain has been delivered. Unlike in other jurisdictions, the final offer vote is tied to impasse in bargaining or to an ongoing job action. The problem here is that the final offer vote allows the employer to bypass the union's negotiating committee and to present an offer to employees. But there's a section in Bill 85 that says that if the employees vote to accept the final offer, it becomes the collective agreement. Now, there's no ability for the board to say, hang on, does this final offer, would this even constitute a collective agreement if it's accepted by the employees? There's no discretion there. It's badly flawed. Well, Bill 85 is going to take away the right to belong to a union from a lot of people that currently have it. New exceptions to the definition of employee will exclude current bargaining unit members and will make it impossible for certain people to become union members. The new exceptions are centered around a new definition of a confidential employee, and it's extremely wide. Nothing like anything else in Canada. All of the exceptions to the definition of employee right now in Canada are consistent, and they only exclude managers and people who have actual access to confidential labor relations information. Well, the new definition says that you'll be excluded from the definition of an employee, and that means you don't get to belong to any union. You're not covered by this legislation. If you have access to strategic planning information, if you have access to budget information. Overall intent appears to be to give employers a number of additional powers against unions in the negotiation of collective agreements, but also to remove some of the most basic protections for vulnerable employees that have stood in place for decades. And it's really disappointing to see the legislation going this way because, on the one hand, they're taking away the ability of employees to organize and to bargain collectively and to really leverage any kind of collective strength, and then on the other hand, they're removing protections that would protect those vulnerable employees that are not members of bargaining units. This is certainly going to make Saskatchewan's labour legislation the worst in Canada, the most regressive in Canada.